Say hello.
Hello, 45 Alpha Charlie Papa Channel. And today we're going to take a look at a collection of single-shot rifles, single-shot cartridge guns. Very interesting time frame in which these happened, shortly after muzzleloading. And then some of them carried over to the smokeless. A lot of them, once smokeless came along, the actions weren't strong enough to handle it. But we're going to take a look at a really nice collection here of just some very unique firearms. What do you say? If it's not 100 years old, you're not interested?
Yeah. Rifles become interesting when they turn 100. Before that, or after that, they're kind of boring. They're all the same.
Yeah, we're going to go through some of the pitfalls of owning some of these rifles.
Yeah, well, from going from the muzzleloader like they used in the Civil War for the most part to these suppository rifles.
Yeah.
Where they take the suppository.
Back when every country had to develop its own cartridge.
Oh yes, absolutely.
There was no standard. Everybody was Wild West of cartridges. You didn't want your enemy to pick up your gun and be able to shoot him with the cartridge you're using.
Exactly. That would be embarrassing.
Yes.
Being shot with your own cartridge. Jeez. Your own gun might be all right, but a cartridge. Yeah. Of course, during the Civil War, primarily both sides were using muzzleloaders. Mm-hmm. That was pretty much true across the whole world.
Yeah, you had a few lever actions at the time, but
those
were very complicated, expensive.
And not very powerful.
Yeah, not very powerful. And, militaries, when they looked at them, I'm sure they were looking at them as very complicated and hard to fix and keep running and fragile.
But shortly after the Civil War, immediately after the Civil War, self-contained cartridges became the thing. Everybody had to have them. And the simplest, easiest, and cheapest actions were single shots. Plus, all of those wonderful governments had tons and tons of surplus firearms laying around. So rather than invent something from scratch
and outlaying the cash to invent something,
of course, because after all, we just had a war, and now we got to denude the military like we always do. So what do? They looked around and said, "Hey, what could we do with all of these old rifles to update them?" So there were an awful lot of conversions from the Civil War muzzleloaders to single-shot cartridge guns. I've got a few examples of guns here that this is by no means a collection of everything that was available. It's just some different action types and some things that came around. Of course, in the United States, we had a ton of 1861 muzzleloaders that were used during the war, and they came up with a conversion to convert it to a single-shot cartridge gun. This is the American Trapdoor Springfield, called the Trapdoor because when you push the lever, it popped open. As trapdoor opened up, you could put one round in, close it, fire it, cock it again.
And those were kind of nice too because it would eject itself, wouldn't it?
These ejected, yes.
Those are self-ejecting. That's something you're going to see that may not.
This gun, of course, leads itself to being world famous because, after all, it was carried by Custer's troopers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
against a bunch of Indians with lever actions.
Yeah. Well, they had a variety of things. Some of the researchers at the Custer battlefield, they can actually trace the movement of individual soldiers by forensic analysis of the cases. As they ran up the hill to get into the group to be killed together. But nothing like togetherness. This is a H&R reproduction of the Trapdoor Springfield. Oh, there's plenty of trapdoors out there. But basically, it was the U.S. taking the muzzleloader and converting it to a single shot.
Yeah, and eventually they just started making them this way.
Yes, they just started, as you got into the later models, they were just making them that way. So that's just one bit of history. Remington thought this was such a good idea. They came up with their own design. I think Ryder came up with the same, that did the Remington Ryder pistol, came up with a rolling block. The rolling block is an interesting rifle because it saved Remington and it almost broke them at the same time. But
everybody's heard of the Sharps rifle.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is number 2.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Kind of forgotten about it.
on
for some people.
the Buffalo fields, this was the second most popular rifle out there, and militaries from all over the world picked this rifle up because, first of all, it was extremely simple, very rugged, rarely ever broke down, had a spring in it that would probably work on a tractor today, and it was simply a hammer and a breech block. You loaded one round in, closed the breech block, pulled the trigger, and it went bang. And it went bang pretty much every darn time. I mean, it's a very reliable rifle, and pretty much the entire second, third, and fourth and fifth world all armed their militaries with some version of the rolling blocks. Some of them were bought from Remington. Some of them were made locally under license. This particular gun was made in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, and it was made under contract to Springfield. It wasn't made by Remington. It was made by Springfield Arsenal, and Springfield paid Remington a royalty of $1 per rifle. This is the 1870 Navy model. They made 10,000 of them with the sight located back here for the Navy. The Navy rejected them because they didn't like the sight right over the chamber. So Remington made 10,000 more with the sight moved up to this location, and sold the ones with the sight on the back
surplus.
to surplus market, who sold them to the French for the Franco-Prussian War. I think they were rechambered in 8mm Lebel, but basically this is the Remington rolling block, and once again a simple, reliable, single shot action. This particular one being military's in 50-70 caliber, and
this isn't necessarily all correct. This one was a barreled action. We've gone through this one on the channel before, but we do have it up and firing. So
yes, as I try and find parts for it, this is the correct sight. As I try and find parts for it, I cannibalized parts from other guns to put together a shooter. Slowly it will become more correct to the original Navy pattern, but right now it's a shooter. But again, another simple action type that was produced in 1870.
1870,
Now,
150 years ago?
Yeah, 150 years old.
Yeah.
And it still shoots really well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as reliable as can be. How many things do you have that are 150 years old that still run the way they did when the day they were new?
Mm-hmm.
That's,
Pretty impressive.
Saying a lot about the engineering of the time. And of course, it was right after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So things like this could be made with interchangeable parts and in great quantities.
You've got another conversion one over there, don't you?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, the English did a similar thing with their 1853 Enfield. Any of you guys who have shot Civil War skirmish or studied the Civil War know the 1853 Enfield was one of the primary arms of the Confederacy. They took all of them that they could get past the Union blockade. But after the war, of course, the 1860s and early 1870s rolled around, and Britain said, well, we need a breech loader like everybody else. I mean, after all, we can't have, all the other people on the continent developing breech loaders.
The empire must not be surpassed.
Exactly. And they came up with the Snyder. I think Snyder was an American guy.
Yeah.
Came up with this system. The U.S. didn't like it. They went with the trapdoor instead. This is basically just like the trapdoor, except that it opens to the side instead of opening forward. It doesn't eject. You have to manually eject it, your cartridge, but it's a single shot made from using the barrels and the stocks from the 1853 Enfields that were muzzle loaders. So it's just another way of finding a way to put a single shot cartridge with an exposed hammer into military cheap cheap. Yeah, these are chicken guns.
And they made these until they could develop their own single shot.
Exactly.
We can probably take a look at that one next.
Well, we can do that, sure.
The most romantic
of
all the single shots.
The queen of the single shot battle rifles, the Martini-Henry, the 577 450 Martini-Henry, made famous at Rourke's Drift, and the movie star of the lot starred in the movie Zulu, and you can see guys firing these in independent fire and in volleys, and it's all a dropping or tilting block action that by operating the lever tilts the block down, the breech block down, and it does eject. Sort of.
It does eject. If you hit the lever hard enough, it will eject.
It's kind of a British thing, you know. I mean, you have to be manly. You know, you have to be a manly
tights.
a manly British soldier. You know? But the Martini-Henry, of course, was quite iconic, and this served the British Army from the time they got rid of the Snyders until they came up with the number one
Mark One
short model Lee Enfield.
Yeah.
Well, the Medford came in there, but it was relatively short. The last ones of these that were made in 303 British. So they were not Martini-Henrys, they were Martini-Enfields, because the British of course have to name it after all the parts that are in it. When they went to the 303 barrel that was made at Enfield, then it became the Martini-Enfield, because the action was still the Martini, but the barrel was the Enfield. So, you know, and like all British arms, it has punch marks on there. It's marked by everybody who ever touched it.
Mm-hmm. Has
to stamp it with something.
Yeah,
so
if you get into all the stampings and stuff on a Martini-Henry, I mean, you can find out all kinds of things of where it was, who had it, where it went. And it's just amazing the history. If it's all there, yeah.
The interesting thing was, again, it was a relatively inexpensive, solid steel, very few moving parts, and very reliable thumper. I mean, it's 577 450, where it took the Snyder 577 round, and necked it down to 45. It was a wildcat.
and brimmed 45.
So
in black powder. And this one actually, you know, lasted past the smokeless.
Oh, yes. It was the last ones British, were loaded with 303 British, probably with cordite.
Yeah.
You know, people talk about cordite, and that was a powder was used, or a stick powder that was used for a very short time. Not to be outdone, of course. Can't be outdone. Everybody else had to have a single shot too. This is a Wurndl, which was Austrian. Again, the same kind of concept as the Snyder, in that
this one's got such a cool action.
You open it and put one round in and close it. It's like the Trapdoor and the Snyder. It's that same concept, just done by the French, because they were French. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is the Austrians, Austria-Hungary, because they had to have one of their own. They couldn't have one. They couldn't just use the one the British had.
And this is one of those that can be an adventure in reloading for.
Oh yes, this one I have not fired yet. I have yet to make up any ammunition for it, because it's got a really thick 90 thousandths rim, and there's not much you can convert it from without doing some pretty fancy stuff.
You've got to go to some specialty places that make some obsolete cartridges.
Well, either that, or you can
try to figure out something to make it from, and there's a lot involved.
Well, you can turn it yourself if you have a lathe on a brass, or you can make a like a washer to thicken the rim on the. I think I should really check the book before I say which cartridge it's converted from. I did look it up, and was working on it, but it's been a little bit, and I don't remember exactly. So I don't
very interesting.
But again, the same type of this action where it opens and you put a single round in there. Then, not to be outdone, the French
Now we're starting to see something familiar.
The French, huh?
The Dreiss needle gun was kind of a predecessor to this.
And the French came up with the chapeau. This has got a bayonet on it that's about more than 2 feet long, and this gun would make a great pike.
Yeah.
Not much of a gun, but a great pike.
With the bayonet, it's probably close to 7.5 feet.
6, at least
probably
6.
close to 7.
Anyway, it's again a single shot, but it's a bolt action. Familiar operation, except that you put one round in and close it, and you're ready to shoot. Again, it's what can I say? It's French. It's French. Yeah. It's French, and therefore it's ugly because the French never made.
It's French, therefore I am.
The French never made a pretty gun. Now, one of the things that is common to most of these is they're about 41 to 45 caliber.
Somewhere in there.
Except for those first couple. Then, of course, Germany. 1871 again, same.
Oh.
That period in the 1870s, everybody was developing different ideas.
Yeah.
The Germans came up with the 71,
and
which was a
the
single shot.
The borders in Europe were changing all the time.
Yep.
Depending on who had the better rifle.
And well, there was plenty of wars there to try and settle that. But this is an 11 millimeter Mauser, 11 millimeter, 43 caliber.
43, yeah.
You know, or 43 Mauser, sometimes it's called, but it was 11 millimeter Mauser. Originally, it was a single shot. That's the 74. Then come the Franco-Prussian War. I think the Franco-Prussian War. They decided that, gee, you know, those French all of a sudden had a multiple shot gun with the label. And they couldn't be outgunned, so they came up with a 7184. 1884, they went and they added a tube underneath this that would operate a lot like a pump shotgun. If you're familiar with the tube underneath the barrel of the pump shotgun, same concept. This happens to be a 7184, and it has as you pull it back, you have a little lifter that picks up the cartridge and brings it up, and all those things. But so it developed from a single shot to a repeater.
So that's basically a converted single shot.
This is a
converted single shot.
A single shot that's been converted to a repeater. But of course, you know, again, it's a bolt action rather than a trapdoor or a falling block or a tilting block. It was a time when development of firearms was just going crazy. Everybody was trying something different. Everybody had a better idea.
The cartridges were the new girl with the curl on the block. I mean, you had to have a cartridge gun.
Exactly. And then in the civilian market, of course, you had the sharps that everybody knows about, and you have the Stevens favorites with 22 and 32, and Remington rolling blocks were made in 32, rimfires, all kinds of cartridges that are no longer around. This is a Stevens. This is what's called a falling block, and when you operate the lever, the block goes down. You put one round in, close your block, and you're ready to fire. And these were very popular in 22 with the kids during the 20s and into the Depression years,
Especially the Depression years,
yeah, where you could help feed the family by going out and popping a rabbit or a squirrel, a tree rat. You go out and help feed the family with a 22 without it costing a lot of money. This particular one is a center fire and happens to be in the 25-20. But again, that's kind of a 25-20 is kind of a useless cartridge. I mean, it would be okay for coyotes and foxes and stuff. I don't know.
Something a little bit bigger game, yeah.
Well, I don't.
But it's still 22 or 25.
25, yeah.
So
but it's
still
only
be good.
20 grains of black powder, which is really a small little cartridge. I'm sure deer have been taken with it, but I wouldn't call it a deer gun by any stretch of the imagination.
Maybe after you've been chasing those rabbits with the 22 for a couple of years, they get smart and say, we're not going to get that close.
Yeah. This is a Stevens, just another type of single shot action with this falling block that falls out of the way and lets you load it, put one round in, and there you go. And then, of course, they have been adapted and they're still being made and used in a lot of different calibers.
Mhm.
This particular one is H&R.
H&R, yep.
Yep. In 223. This one is a current production item.
Now they stopped producing about 5 years ago, but there are still manufacturers out there making the direct opens.
Okay, so it's not a current
It's
production.
not current production, no.
I lied. I wasn't aware that it stopped production.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sorry.
when Remington quit production on them.
But this is a simple break open action, single shot break open, much like a single shot shotgun.
Back to the 1860s. Yeah,
Mhm.
they were doing shotguns and stuff.
About the time they came up with a cartridge, they came up with a break open action because it
was simple manufacture.
Yeah, again.
Usually you didn't have many armories or anything taking these, but these were great trapper guns.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason this particular system has lasted so long, the test of time, the break open is easy to make.
Mm-hmm.
You can change
receivers are cast.
you can change barrels on them very easily, and they make themselves really ready for optics.
Yep.
In better sights.
Yep. And optics, of course, are really not very much of a well, they'd be a custom addition to any of the others.
Yeah, in the 1920s and stuff, that would be
that would
pretty
be
high end. But I think over time, the fact that you could put an optic on there, or the better sights or whatever, lent this to continue to stay in production.
And
a lot of shotguns are like this.
The hammer extension, which once you put the scope on it, lets you get to the
hammer,
cocking the hammer without having to jam your gloved thumb between the scope and the hammer. So there's a lot to be said for them. I mean, they're inexpensive, they're easy to make. There are a lot of them out there in all kinds of calibers, everything from 22 on all the way up to well, I know they make them in 45-7. I've seen them in 45-7.
H&R made these in 500 Smith & Wesson.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yes.
I didn't realize there were 500 Smiths out there. I knew there were 45-7s, but I didn't know there were 500 Smiths.
500 Smith & Wesson, that'd be a heck of a cartridge on a rifle.
Yeah, well, when they came out with it, I looked at it and I said, boy, this is going to be a nice lever gun round, is what I thought. Like the Marlin 444 and all that sort of stuff. I thought the 500 Smith would be a good lever gun round. I can't imagine shooting it in a handgun. Like it was designed for.
They're not fun.
No, I'm sure they're not. And just to talk about how that whole single action idea has never died. Currently, as far as I know, unless they stopped.
No, Ruger still does make it.
Ruger has been making the Ruger #1, a single shot. Once again, falling block action. It's a little fancier. It's got a little lock on the lever, so the lever doesn't accidentally get pushed down. It's a true falling block where the block falls straight down. You can see it protrudes out the bottom once it comes down. And it's available in pretty much any caliber you want to buy it in.
Yeah, whatever caliber they're making that year. They only make them one caliber per year, from my understanding.
Okay. This particular one's a 223 because I use it as a varmint gun, and superbly accurate rifle. I have yet to be charged by a saber-toothed prairie dog that I couldn't stop with a single shot. So
those are called jackalopes.
Only the horny ones.
Only the horny ones.
Yeah. But again, and it's just an improvement over the whole idea of one round to hunt with on non-dangerous game, and keeping the price down. Although on the Ruger #1, I wouldn't say they ever kept the price down.
This is one of their nicer firearms.
Yes, and I have to admit, I truly do like the gun. I love the gun. I shoot it a lot and enjoy it very much. So just as I said, that's about 10 different single shots, showing different
There's
progression.
more out there, and you
Oh,
can
yeah,
get into
tons
a
more.
deep rabbit hole looking up single shots.
And some of them are affordable. Others are not quite as affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Like this number one is kind of near the top. Of the
Rolling blocks in a common caliber are not as affordable.
Yeah, well,
You get something like a 50-70 government.
The 50-70 government and the
stuff that you
45-70
actually go out
government
and
is
buy ammo for.
Otherwise, rolling blocks, if you're willing to do the reloading thing and not afraid to tackle some oddball calibers, they were made in 7 or 8 millimeter Lebel for the French.
Yeah, they were made in a Mauser card, a smokeless Mauser. I don't remember.
7 millimeter Mauser, 7x57 Mauser. Although there are some chamber dimensions there that you have to fool around with. It's not a real easy just buy a Mauser and drop it in there. They're a little bit funky.
You know, because these are so early, it's early cartridge guns. You're going to find that you're going to have to probably develop a load, develop a cartridge, figure out what cartridge you can use to maybe make it from, have them custom made. But it's all in getting into these and all of that, you know, just shooting history.
Oh yeah, as I said, I find this whole genre, if you will, interesting because of the rapid development. Going from, you can see the ideas. You can almost see the ideas popping into inventors' heads.
Yep.
You know, hey, you know, if we take this and do that, we can have something that's you know, easy to make and cheap.
And then John Moses Browning and Paul Mauser came to the scene and
screwed that all up.
And smokeless powder, whoever invented that, the French, whatever French scientist, mad scientist that came up with that. It just completely changed the game.
Oh yeah, this game changed overnight. But the game was changing from 1860 on, to, you know, from the 60s to the 80s. It was just express train. Everybody was coming up with ideas. John Browning with his single shot rifles. It's just amazing that in that period of time, there's lots of interesting guns to accumulate. I won't say collect. I don't have a collection. I have an accumulation of stuff. But seeing the different types is, and watching their development is really an interesting.
And the different types of actions and the stuff that made it and didn't. It's just a fascinating.
And I would say one more thing. A lot of people don't want to deal with black powder. I hear that all the time. Why do you deal with that black powder? It's messy and it's hard to clean up. It really is not, at least in these cases, it is really not hard to clean a black powder firearm, because all you really have to do is open the breech, spray some Belostol, a solution of Belostol in water, 50-50 mix, 3-to-1 mix, whatever you want to do, and
and that kind of oils it and stuff too at the same time. Yeah. It's a real simple, you know, when these guns were new, they were using hot, soapy water.
Yeah. Hot water.
Hot water.
And now you use Belostol and water, and you have a water-based lubricant that will keep it from rusting. I spray it, Belostol down the bore. I run a couple of patches down there until they quit coming out, you know, black and mucky, and I'm done. It's not a very difficult cleanup. And black powder is not hard to load. Doing reloads in black powder, you simply fill the case up with black powder and then seat the bullet on top of it to make sure there's no airspace, because it's important you don't have any airspace between the powder and the bullet. If you want to do reduced loads, you'd use fillers and stuff, but I won't get into that because this is not a reloading video.
Right.
But it's not hard to load for, and it's not hard to clean up after. And you guys that are out there that like to shoot history, you're missing it if you're not playing with these. They're a ball to shoot.
They are really fun to shoot, and you have a very different report.
Yeah, and I think we should do a couple of shots with a couple of these, and then I'll come back and spend the evening cleaning.
Yeah. That sounds like a great idea.
we can go
Deal.
Deal. We can go out to the range and get a couple shots off.
All right. This is 45 Alpha Charlie Papa Channel. Just thought we'd bring out some single shots. Continue the conversation down below. If there's one out there you have, or you really like shooting, you let us know. I love comments. I love interacting with.
And I
with
realize this is not a comprehensive list.
It's
of
not
the
a
action
comprehensive
cards.
list, but it's a pretty decent list
It's-
for most people. Most people may have one or two.
Yeah. So, anyway, happy trails, and we'll see you again next time.
And we are out. And should we sing
Happy
again?
trails to you. We haven't done it in a while.
We meet again.
Happy trails to you.
Keep smiling until then.
Happy trails, everybody.
Adios.